Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for episode 7 of the CSA revolution. I don't think it's a revolution anymore, it's a fact, right? But we're going to continue the revolution moving forward. I want to welcome my panelists today from the FICSA team. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining. Cisco Vicente from FDA, Damian Phillips from Boston Scientific, and Ron Shadang from Johnson & Johnson. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining. Okay, just a couple of housekeeping item. This webinar will be recorded, and we also have some handouts, which is really the FDA draft guidance and the FDA draft guidance letter. So if you'd like to take a look at the guidance, if you haven't yet, the objective of this series of a webinar and the intent of it really is to make sure that by November 14, you make the appropriate public comments on the guidance, and that's about it. And a couple of things here, also a reminder for those of you who perhaps for some technical glitches missed last week's town hall. We have the recording for the webinar for the town hall where we had all 16 FICSA team members, including the FDA, Cisco Vicente, and Bleda Verniki attended and responded to a lot of questions. So please make sure to go listen to the webinar. And basically, if you have any additional question, please provide your questions. We'll be more than happy as a FICSA team to respond to them. The other thing that I want to remind you again, and will continue to remind you throughout this webinar, is to please submit your comment by November 14. Of course, after reading the guidance and listening to all of our webinars. Okay, here's the webinar series. Of course, all the from episode 1 to episode 6, they're all recorded. You can listen to them. Today, we're going to be talking about establishing the appropriate record, and there will be 2 more left for the following weeks, November 4th, November 11th. Those will be focused on case studies. I'm not going to announce the companies yet who will be presenting, but please stay tuned for that. As always, big thanks to the FDA Industry CSA team. In today's panel, we're talking specifically about establishing record, okay? The appropriate record. So we're going to start with Mr. Vicente. Cisco, good morning again, and thank you. I understand how hard you've been working the last 5 years, especially the last few weeks. I'm sure you're on a daily webinar and conferences. The very first slide we're looking at, and I know you can't see it, Cisco, it's really talking about the scope of the guidance and what is it replacing. So if you can just, in a couple of minutes, speak to that, and then we'll kick it off.
Sounds great, Khaled. Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity and chance here to run through that. Yeah, the first idea there and the cover to the scope, because we get this question quite a bit, just to make sure people really have that in context, right? The guidance as it's written is intended to be something that will supersede the general principles of validation guidance, right, as it is written now. But not the full guidance, I'm sorry. Give me a second here because there's some noise coming on in the background. And it's my own computer. All right, there we go. So yeah, that's what I figured. The guidance will supersede that part 6 of the general principles of validation guidance. It's the part that is geared towards the automation that's used in production of quality systems within the guidance. While a lot of what we said here in this guidance is already in snippets, right? Because it really is already in that policy. What we tried to do and what we heard was that there was lack of clarity, right? What else additional tools could you use? What happens when you get all these extra current state testing methodologies or just vendor information that you're available, right? How do you put all that together to really talk about that validation piece that's in part 6? So this guidance is intended to help provide a set of recommendations to give another way of achieving what's there and provide a little bit more clarity around that part 6 portion. So once this is in full effect and final, that's the intent. It'll supersede that portion of the general principles of validation guidance everybody seems to be accustomed to.
Great. Thank you, Cisco. And I know there was a big box, red box that you're probably not seeing it on my screen, is that the guidance does not provide recommendation for the design verification or validation requirement specified in 21 CFR 82030 when applied to software in a medical device and a software as a medical device.
Yeah, I appreciate you highlighting that one. There was already a lot of that stuff outlined in the rest of that guidance. Again, this is not superseding any of the rest of that guidance. If you're looking for just the current thinking or recommendations that are associated within the scope of the device or the software as a device, then look to the general principles of validation guidance. This is trying to extend even some of the ideas and principles there into the production space and the automation used, for that, the tools, the machinery that's there, and the quality system activities.
Awesome, thank you so much. And Cisco, just an FYI, I know yesterday.
There goes again. I was trying to see if I could get on a way to get to see the slides, but it doesn't seem to be playing well with me.
No, that's okay. So right now, really what I'm looking at is your slide. I shamelessly copied it because I loved it, right? It's showing the moving forward sign, in my opinion. So what we've been talking about is we've identified the intended use, we determined the risk-based approach, and we determined the appropriate assurance activities. And that's what we've been talking about in the past webinar. So I promise I will not get you to go through them again. For those of you who are listening to us today, the FDA actually yesterday had an official webinar. It was conducted by Cisco and 2 other folks from the FDA. And these slides were there as well. So please take a listen to it. Again, there's a lot of communication going out. The intent of it is to be as transparent as possible. Listen to what the FDA's thinking, intent of this draft guidance. So again, this is not the only place that you're hearing it from. It's also the FDA webinar that was yesterday, and it's recorded. We will share with you at the end of this the link to it, so you can also listen to Cisco and the FDA. So the next slide that we're going through is also stolen from you, Cisco. I just love them, by the way. So it's okay. We steal from the government once in a while. Why not? It's about.
It's fair. I think I steal from everybody else when it's good.
As long as you say you did, right? So here we're really talking about establishing the appropriate record. So if you can just highlight it in a couple of words, about capturing sufficient evidence to demonstrate that software was assessed and performs as intended. Your perspective, yeah. Cisco.
And I'm hoping, and as you mentioned, you guys are probably going to go into this in more depth, which is something that I think I appreciate more about these sessions. It's really opportunity to answer the more detailed questions because we didn't get to really do that during the FDA webinar, right? Our position at that point in time is just to present the details of the guidance. But part of what we were looking to do with this guidance is to clarify the notion that, again, the record doesn't need to be this burdensome, overdrawn activity, right? It is really about what's of value to the organization, right? How do you know what it was that you did, why you did it, how you went about doing it, what you determined at the end. It wasn't intended to drive, volumes of information. It doesn't add value to you. And oftentimes it was done more to be able to demonstrate something to the regulator who I will be honest, you've heard Seneca, Thomas Moore say it too. They don't want to look at, right? They don't want to look at those volumes of information. So this is about really highlighting that idea. The record isn't a activity that's undertaken just to meet a regulatory need. It should be something for value, and it should be something that's distinct, easy, and usable for you as an organization. And I'm not going to go through and reread what may be or highlight what's on the slide. And I'm sure you've got people on who are much more experienced and capable of providing advice and detail on this for the audience here. But yeah, I think it's that notion to keep that in perspective. We are not looking to drive paperwork. Right? We're looking to drive usable, valuable information that can help you as an organization with these, with moving forward with a lot of this implementation of these technologies.
Thank you, Cisco. I'm actually staying on that slide. I'm going to ask my friend Damian Phillips from Boston Scientific on his perspective on the establishing an appropriate record. If you can just elaborate a little bit, I know how passionate you are about it, Damian, and then we'll jump to Ron.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Absolutely. I suppose really the key thing is, the key message in CSA is what Cisco just said, right? That we're not looking to stop doing any of the work we've done. We're just really looking to reduce the amount of documentation. I think Cisco just saying validation shouldn't be driving paperwork. I think that's what we've been doing as an industry. I know that's what we had been doing prior to CSA. I know from speaking to other folks as well, that was really what industry thought CSA was about. So still do the same amount of work. The same amount of work needs to get done. You still need to verify the software. You define its intended use. You have your requirements. You have your trace matrix if that's what your procedure calls for. You have your design docs if needed. You know, you have your testing. You have your test plan. You have your test script. You have your test objective evidence. We're going to go into that a lot more today. But I think really in the testing place is where we see as an industry, we went crazy on documentation, right? You know, not unusual to have, you know, test scripts 20, 30, maybe even 50, 60, 70 pages long, right? With actual results and screenshots. We're really setting ourselves up, you know, for problems here. We spend a lot of our time making sure the test script actually worked and that our actual results met our expected. Like a lot of crazy stuff around matching screenshots and labeling screenshots. So I think what you're going to see today, what you see in the guidance document, what you're going to hear today is really step back from a lot of the documentation, especially in the test evidence area. No need for screenshots unless you actually believe it's adding value. You do not need to take screenshots to appease the auditor, and that's what we have been doing. And also for actual results, record actual results if it helps you test the software. If it doesn't help you test the software, then you don't need to be writing down everything that you used to say. And actually, another thing that CSA promotes is what it said they're writing down. And parts of industry we heard before as well believe that testing had to be completed by hand. You know, that was never the case, right? And you're never going to see that documented anywhere. So encouraging, you know, automated testing, automated execution, automated or electronic execution, electronic capture of evidence as well. So lots of, I suppose, opportunity to become more efficient there around testing. Still do the testing, but a lot less documented evidence.
Thank you, Damian. Ron, I know you've got your opinion about this, and I know we've talked about this a lot. The validation evidence, right? What it means. If you can I put this together here with some help from good friends. If you can just walk us through it.
Sure. And in this particular slide, again, the information there, I think it's like when talking about evidence, I think historically, like as an industry, evidence meant for a lot of folks screenshots. So that was your evidence. And I think in some ways we have become addicted to that. So like essentially we need to wean ourselves out of that approach, and not everything is about a screenshot. And really, and sometimes in order to do that and to have a little bit of that paradigm shift, we need to go back to the meaning of things, some of the definitions, right? So like here again, what validation? This is taken from, I think it is like definitions within like part 820. So it is for medical devices. Again, it is defined, but it is applicable across the board, and will similarly would apply to, again, if you're familiar with ISO 13485 or GAMP5, which is and kind of like, and having to break it down a little bit, is confirmation by examination and provision of objective evidence. So translating that in layman's, and again, English is not my native language, so I always have to like play with some of those. But so like confirmation by examination, while in this, for a lot of these things when it comes to systems, is usually through testing, right, or some kind of verification, and provision of objective evidence. Now here's where it gets tricky, because then for a lot of folks that means like a screenshot. But if you look in all the regs across the world, you're not going to find any regulation that says thou shalt have screenshots as objective evidence, right? So it is a little bit open-ended here, but then essentially objective evidence that a particular requirement for a specific intended use can be consistently fulfilled. So essentially you do testing and you have your objective evidence, which are going to get to that in a second, to demonstrate that essentially something works as intended, right? And it can be done consistently. So what is the objective evidence? And again, here I just put like, we had to put together here some things about like 82070I, and there's a very similar language to 1345. And also you can see on GAMP5 about the use of hard copy like test evidence. Again, some of this, again, with the technology that is available today, it's like in most cases you don't even have like hard copy, right? It's like a lot of it is digital. But I think evidence is really like, it is a chain of events that connected, like that all together essentially meet the intent of that definition of validation. So as you will see in the guidance, particularly like in section D, it talks about, again, defining the intended use, doing risk management. And then here I use the word requirements. I know yesterday in Cisco's presentation, someone asked about, so like, is requirements the same thing? It's like, a lot of it is, if you're using waterfall, if you're using agile or safe or CI/CD, again, might call different names, but essentially it's like in more general terms of what is your spec, essentially, like what are you trying to build it to, right? So you have your intended use, and typically you do that for the system, not for each individual requirement. And then you have your risk management, which again, you can do for the system as a whole. Some companies would do it like on a requirement by requirement basis. Is it like right or wrong? It's your choice there. Again, it's like how detailed you want to get. And then you have your requirements. So essentially, here's where you start defining things like, what do I want this system to do for me? And then again, if you're using Agile, might have epics or user stories. And then from there, it cascades into, okay, in order for me to test this thing, I might use scripts, or might just, again, I might do like unscripted, but I still have some kind of like test objective. Now, if you're gonna test it, how do you know that it was good or bad, right? So you need to define your acceptance criteria. And then you go and execute that test. So to see like, so is the system doing what it's supposed to do? And then you have your results. Now your results could be in the form of a pass or fail. It's totally acceptable. Or you might, again, in some instances, you might decide to take a screenshot. For example, a good situation where a screenshot might be usable or useful is you have a certain defect and system is not doing what it's supposed to do. What's the best way for you to communicate to your developers that you encounter a certain issue for them to resolve it? Sometimes taking the screenshot is the best approach versus like trying to describe it with a million words. So again, you can just like being I would say like again sensitive to the use of screenshots. And in the beginning, as you transition from maybe like using the screenshots for everything to using fewer, it is a transition process. So like, don't like, you can gradually pull people away from screenshots, say yes, like in these cases, yes, you can do a pass fail, it's good. And then who did it and when, right? So that whole cascade over there, that really is your evidence, because it shows things like from beginning to end, from essentially your intended use to all the way to testing for particular requirements and being able to do it like in a consistent manner. So really, again, when talking about validation, evidence is not the screenshot. So to me, like a screenshot is evidence that something appeared on the screen at a particular point in time. But if you talk to anyone that works with technology, it's very easy to fake a screenshot. So is that really a good use of the screenshot? No, again, you can, again, these days, technology is there, you can fake a screenshot. So is that adding any value? And you need to ask yourself that question, like about value. So that cascade together is really is what your evidence is, to say, yes, my system, so again, at a high level, my system has a certain intended use, and I have tested it to show that it can meet that intent, and it can do it like consistently. So it kind of like it's really just taking us back to definitions, and also highlighting the fact that there is not a single regulation that says thou shall use or thou shall have screenshots as evidence. So I'm going to pause here, because otherwise I'm going to go over time.
Thank you.
I'll let you guys elaborate from there.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. And I want to thank the person who put GAM5, because everything I'm looking on here on this slide, it's really point to medical device, but we know that this guidance is not just for medical device. So Cisco, I know this question is going to come up, so let's go ahead and just answer it now, please, if you don't mind. Does this guidance apply only to medical device or others?
So this goes on to the idea and notion again, what's in the regs, right? Guidance is not regs. It is recommendations, right? It is current thinking. If you look at what the guidance is, and we stated it clearly, it is tackling and addressing the requirements that are in the medical device regs, because they are the ones that speak towards the construct of validation, objective evidence. If you look through a lot of the other regs, you're not going to get that same type of terminology and language. But what we try to do, and when we put together general principles of validation guidance, which a lot of people use across the different commodities as a reference, and you'll see it even in this guidance, right? That we did develop this in consultation with our biologics group. We developed it with our biologics group. This went through consultation with our drug sister center there, with our office combination products, and with ORA. If there are more concerns about how much exclusive coverage there is, people are welcome to comment on that, and we will take that back and address that. But what we try to do here, and you'll see it in what GAMP did, right? These are just generally good methodologies and approaches across the construct of validation. It doesn't matter commodity. There's no commodity that says, hey, we have to validate this completely differently than what the rest of the world does. It's really up to the organization. But the way the right guidance is written, it was written towards the part of the regs that are for medical devices, because that's the one that has the explicit call out around the validation pieces.
Thank you, Cisco. Appreciate it. I think we showed this specific slide in our last webinar when we were talking about the testing activities. However, since last week, as a FICSA team all got together, met and walked through, just like you, the industry, we're all working on comments, and we want to modify it so it fits all of us, all of our needs, right? One specific one that I'd like Ron to speak briefly to the limited scripted testing and the changes. I highlighted, it's still written here as it was, right? So if you can please comment, Ron, on the red text and also the coloring. Why is it all mixed now for both scripted and unscripted?
Will do. So I'll try to be brief. So
Brief.
in the current version of the draft that is out there that everyone has access to, it talks about limited scripted testing as a hybrid approach. So basically saying limited scripted is a combination of unscripted and robust scripting. But the reality is that's not like the true definition of it. So you will likely see in the, again, making its way into the final guidance is that limited scripted is really, it is a scripted test, but it is light in the level of detail. So you give enough detail for your tester, but you're not necessarily going like mouse click by mouse click and keystroke by keystroke and like in all the details. Like for some of the testers, if they're familiar with the system, you can give them enough information to execute without having to be like so detailed. Now, switching gears to the coloring on the side, and we had a lot of discussion around that because there was some interpretation that essentially was this one-to-one relationship that if you had scripted testing, or essentially if you had something that was high risk, that you had to use scripted testing. And if you had something that was low risk, then you had to use unscripted. After a lot of conversation and alignment, the reality is, and this is really about giving flexibility to industries, that there is not this causality that a high risk has to be scripted. You could very well have something that is high risk and maybe you do exploratory testing because again, you might have a plan and you do that. Again, it's based on knowledge and it's more about your coverage and managing your risks than it is about writing something down or not in the level of detail. Likewise, using the other end of the spectrum, which is, let's say you have something that is low risk, it doesn't mean that you have to use unscripted. You have very well, depending on who your testers are, you might have something that is low risk, and you can choose to have a very detailed script to execute that, right? So again, it's about being smart, or again, looking at what the value add and looking at what is the right thing to do. So that's part of the clarification that hopefully is going to come out. That is that there is not this causality. High means scripted, low means unscripted. Is all of those are options. You might then again choose for your specific company how to use that, but those are all options. So it's again here the intent of the guidance is not to prescribe or to create policy, but it's just to give options to people, and then the industry should choose again for your individual company what is best for you. So I'll pause here because my brief is already long.
Thank you, sir.
Can I quickly add something to that, because I think it's important. It's something that anytime guidance is written, right, is a struggle. Something that is an idea of examples to kind of highlight a certain connection point suddenly become, as Ron mentioned, right, the causality chain, which it wasn't the intent. As he mentioned, there may be scenarios where the better way to test a high-risk option is exploratory testing. And we want to enable that type of flexibility and people to really think through this. As it was mentioned there too, if you've got a very low low risk thing, it might be just better to script it all, automate it, and let it run, in perpetuity that way. This was about giving flexibility to manufacturers to really choose what the right methodology and approach was for those risks identified. The examples were there to highlight a way, especially a way to kind of execute tests or think through it or capture documentation, but they weren't intended to be the chain of how it gets done or what gets associated. And that's feedback we've heard since it's been out, and something that we've got to take to heart as we move forward.
Thank you, Cisco. Appreciate it. Damien, your screen looks frozen. I hope you can hear us. Did you want to add any comments on this? I think we lost Damien at the point. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and not go through additional slides because I think we've got maybe less than 15 minutes. So what I'd like to do, gentlemen, is to go through some of the questions that we've been receiving on the chat. So I see here a two-part question, but I'm going to go ahead and read it for us. It says, good morning, team. As we begin the journey to identify opportunities to take leaner approach in some aspects, we begin to struggle a little, especially with determining whether we need to continue doing requirements in the traditional format, URS, FRS, in subsequent risk analysis to determine risk and test scaling. There are thoughts that we only need to do a generic intended use when identifying the intended use, but not further the composition of requirement, etc. I think the next part of the question is any thoughts? And then I'll stop here. Ron.
So I think one thing to keep in mind is that you always, again, with this guidance, is that it doesn't mean that traditional CSV has gone away. And this is like throwing that out the window and now there is this new thing. So traditional CSV, again, is still there. It's still valid. This guidance is not nullifying that. So in some cases, again, you might see opportunities to have, again, to enhance your process and to gain some efficiencies, and really asking the question is like, is this activity adding value? And so, again, some of the deliverables that you had before, they might still be part of your software development lifecycle. You might still want to have those because, like, for example, some of the testing that you do, like for system testing or UAT, you probably will continue to do those. How you execute to those, then with this guidance is giving you a little bit more of detail. So the other thing is, just because this guidance is going to come out, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change everything, right? So there is always the option of doing nothing. Again, if you're very happy with the way you do your software development today and your validation, and you don't want to change, you don't have to. This guidance is not forcing your hand. Now, the guidance provides opportunities for adding value and for streamlining things. And again, you can consider those. So I think bottom line is traditional CSV is not being thrown out. It's still there. It's still valid. It's still a valid practice. And what this is doing is just giving you some opportunities to refocus your energy and your resources in terms of making sure you deliver a good product of good quality, and that you again you find value in doing some of those activities. So I'll pause here, see if Damien has anything else, or if you want to switch to another question.
Sure. Damien, I know you dropped off. Did you hear the question? If not, I can go on with a new
question. I missed the question, sorry, Kyle. I think really from what I heard from Ron, it's really CSA the only approach now, is that it?
Yeah, let me go on with the next question. It says, can you explain what is it meant by establish, review, and approval when appropriate? And I think this is coming from the guidance.
I can take
Damien.
up first. Oh, sorry.
No, Damien first, because you spoke a lot.
Yeah. And this is a good question, folks, as well. I know when we met last week in Washington, we all talked about what that means as well. First, establish, review, and approval of the record. If you think about testing, right? You think about your test plan. You need to create a plan. You need alignment, an agreement with the parties involved. Some companies, like many companies, that may be your quality team or whoever is partnering with you in the validation exercise. You document your test plan, you get agreement and alignment, and then you go and you execute. So that's what the approval up front means. Obviously, different types of test execution. That's sort of like waterfall I was talking a minute ago. Lots of different automated execution. Agreement and alignment may be gained within tools, and that would be somebody, somebody independent from the tester, saying, hey, I'm aligned with your approach here. This sounds like I like, your selection of scripted, unscripted, or whatever you're planning on doing makes sense for the features we're testing here. Let's go ahead and execute. So it's approval prior to your test execution, and then it's also the approval and acceptance post execution.
Awesome. Ron, I think this question is for you. but I think Damien will have something to say, and probably Cisco, because this is something we discussed last week, as a matter of fact. If the test meets the expected result, can you not write the actual results and just show pass?
Yes.
Good. That's a quick one here. Damien?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Cisco, you don't have to answer if you don't want to. It's up to you.
Yeah, I guess they've already covered that portion of it. I think that's always been the case, right? It's never been a situation where if it didn't make sense, a pass was appropriate. We weren't expecting a lot of the nitty-gritty
Awesome.
background information that goes on.
Actually, the next question, Cisco, I know somebody about 2 years ago asked you that same question, and you said, why would you want to do that? So let's answer it anyway. Hi, team. Is it okay to take video instead of screenshots?
Yes.
Yeah.
But why? I think it's too much work.
Doing it creates a lot of storage problems and everything. So
yeah.
If you have a reason to do it, yes, you can do it. There's nothing telling you have to do it. Definitely nothing in the regulations telling you to do it. There's nothing, you'll find nothing in this guidance about it either. But yeah, if that's what suits your testing evidence, go for it. But it's definitely not something you'd see that's a norm across industry.
Yeah. So same here. It's like there is a storage concern, and then there is also the searchability. So maybe at the time it's easy to go through and basically say yes, everything that needed to happen happened. But long term, let's say you have a health authority inspection and you need to show that a particular requirement was tested. Sometimes it might be hard to find it to say yes, this is where it was. And so again, it might pose some challenges. But is it a viable option? Yes, it is.
Sounds great. Alrighty, another long question here, but I'm going to go ahead and read it quick. The guidance says FDA recommends that manufacturers document their decision-making process for determining whether a software feature, function, or operation is intended for use as part of production or the quality system in their standard operating procedure. Should SOPs really list out individual features and functions with individual rationales for their use? Most operational SOP describe the process and not necessarily a click-by-click user guide on how the application is used.
Yeah, so let me just take this one quickly before you get from the expert, because the idea here wasn't to say your SOP needs to include that level of granularity, right? I think what we were looking to say and let people know is, especially when you're talking about managing this kind of a change effort internally, put in your SOP that you're going to think through all these features and functionalities and decide which ones are relevant to think through and test, right? It goes back again, you're capturing a process in your SOP, not this level of detail.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, is the expectation for testing to not capture the tester date, time, and results as it happens, or it is basically saying who did it without any approval of the tester? Anyone?
So I'll take a first stab at that one. I think in that table 1 of the guidance, it talks about essentially for all types of testing, so all 5 that are there, that the expectation in the column on the right about essentially your documentation is you are capturing who did it and when. Now, there is nothing, again, in at least for computerized systems that says that you have to have signatures. So that depends again. So you again, if you're, let's say, if you're using an automated system, you already have your audit trail and you have your access controls that only people that should be there are there and entering that information. So capturing of signatures is something that, again, you need to define. If your process requires it, then you do it. There is no predicate rule that says that it has to be approved or you need approvals. And so again, that's for you to define, like if it is an approval or just basically essentially indicating through credentials that who performed it, right? So that again depends on your process. Also, the same thing about having I'm again using like air quotes here, like independent quality, right? So many organizations typically have quality reviewing either through sampling or like 100% of the results, and so that many times is captured somehow. But so basically back to the table is that it basically says the organization has to define the level of approvals, so there is an expectation that you know who did it and when, and if it was a pass or fail.
Great, thank you. I guess one more question, and this is it, and I'll take your closing comments, gentlemen. And I think this is for Cisco. I was wondering what the process to inform the FDA inspectors about these type of changes, as many times our testing approach is heavily influenced by our experiences from inspections. Cisco.
Yeah, and I think it was mentioned yesterday, I think Mary, when she talked about in the guidance, once this is final, this will be something that will be included and implemented throughout the formal testing and training. But we have been working on this for a while now. The ideas, like I said, ORA has reviewed it. The concepts are something that are supported, and I think from an investigative preference, they prefer to be having the discussion on risk than getting into the weeds on testing, which is oftentimes all they have the options to do because they get dumped a volume of testing protocols and everything else when they go on site. I don't believe that there really is going to be a significant issue and hurdle. And there have been companies who've already gone through their internal, their audits with, the regulators outside following the 1345, and some have already gone through FDA inspections, and this has not been a concern. So our investigators are well trained and geared to talk about risk. And if they have that conversation and you're able to articulate what you did and how, again, it establishes what they're looking for, which is that level of confidence that you're on top of your game. It's when everything just kind of gets dumped on them and they just got to start digging through and finding that you start getting some of those, I think somebody, as the question mentioned, some of those practices that then start influencing the testing behavior.
Sounds good. Gentlemen, just final closing comments. We'll start with you, Cisco, and then Damien and Ron, please.
Sure thing. And like I want to make sure that people take away from all this is we are encouraging comments, right? This should get the conversation going, but there's a lot of complexity in this topic in general. Let's get it out there so we know how to make this something that's going to be usable and hopefully not too prescriptive moving forward, because again, the intent was to enable more flexibility for manufacturers, not tell them detail to detail what they must do, how they must capture, because that's not going to be of value, I think, to anyone down the road.
Thank you, Cisco. Damien, any last comment? Uh-oh, he's frozen. Ron?
Sure. I think for folks, the draft guidance is out now, right? So up until now, we have been talking about the draft coming out. So the draft is out. So the thing is, start slow, but do start, again, working towards CSA. There is a lot to be gained there.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron. I think Damien is definitely, we lost him here. Really, thank you for attending this webinar, and hopefully it's making a difference and learning more about the guidance. Please don't forget November 14, submit your comments, and that's about it. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, gentlemen.